Hello, everyone. Afternoon. Happy Monday. Happy day after the Super Bowl to Chiefs fans. Condolences to the are you a 49ers fan?
Yeah.
So am I, Saeed. We have an issue in which we agree. Vadon is a lot of 49ers fans in this room. Well, condolences to all my fellow 49ers fans. The only thing I will say, if any of you thought that Patrick Mahomes wasn't going to do that at some point, then you haven't been watching Patrick Mahomes for very long. Anyway, on to the topic at hand. I'm going to start with some opening remarks. We are pleased today to welcome Dr. Kurt Campbell as Deputy Secretary of State, following his confirmation by the Senate on February 6th and swearing in this morning. Deputy Secretary Campbell's distinguished career includes service in the Navy, positions at the Treasury Department and Pentagon, his previous service as the State Department's Assistant Secretary for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, and most recently at the White House as the Indo-Pacific Coordinator. He also brings extensive experience outside of government, including in academia, the think tank community, and the private sector. We will share more about Deputy Secretary Campbell's engagements as he begins his role in advancing President Biden's and Secretary Blinken's vision of a world that is more free, open, prosperous, and secure. But for today, I just wanted to welcome him to the building. On behalf of all of us here, we look forward to working with you. And with that, Sean, do you want to start us off?
Rafa? Sure. Very different.
I was just trying to go in order from the usual way we go. Sean, go ahead.
Okay. Could I ask you about the operation in Rafah that the Israelis had? First of all, if the United States has an opinion on this, I mean, there are quite a few, over 100 civilian casualties apparently. The president has publicly called for Israel to have a plan for civilians there. Are you under the impression that this is part of a larger operation? Was this a specific thing to get hostages? To what extent are you okay with this going ahead right after the president's conversation with the prime minister?
So a few things about that. One, I will say with respect to this specific set of airstrikes, I will let the Israeli government speak to what they were intended to do, what they were intended to accomplish. That's appropriate for them to speak to. I will say that as the president made clear, as the secretary made clear in his conversation with the prime minister and other members of the Israeli government on the trip last week, we do not support any military campaign in Rafah going forward, as long as they cannot properly account for the 1.1 million people, by some estimates, who are in Rafah today, some of whom have already been displaced, some of whom have been displaced multiple times. We think there needs to be a credible plan that they can actually execute before they undertake any military campaign in Rafah. Now, that said, they have conducted airstrikes against Rafah really since going back to the original days of the campaign. It is not our assessment that this airstrike is the launch of a full-scale offensive happening in Rafah. We just saw, obviously, the order from the prime minister last week to the Israeli military to develop a plan for dealing with Rafah. We look forward to reviewing that plan. We look forward to being briefed on it. And we will make clear, as we did last week and as the president did in his conversation over the weekend, that without such a plan that is credible and that they can execute, we do not support a full-scale military operation there going ahead.
And could I just push that briefly? We say you would not support it. I mean, this is, of course, the language of the White House as well. What does that actually mean? Does that mean say no, don't do it, it's not a good idea, or does that mean that there are actual repercussions or that to the relationship?
Look, I don't want to get ahead of the events as they currently stand today. They have said that they will develop and they will implement a humanitarian plan. We have made clear that we think it is imperative that they do so, and we're going to look and see what they develop.
On Rafah, you said it's not U.S. assessment that the airstrikes are the start of a full-scale offensive there. Is it your assessment that they will soon launch the full-scale offensive there?
Again, so first of all, with respect to this airstrike, as I said, they have conducted airstrikes against military targets in Rafah going back to the beginning of the campaign. But it is our assessment this is not part of a full-scale military operation there, because we heard what the prime minister said over the weekend, which he has just tasked the military with developing that humanitarian plan. It has not been developed yet, let alone executed. And it is our expectation that a plan should be developed, it should be credible, it should be executed before they launch such a military
Right,
campaign.
but did you get any assurances from the Israelis that they're not going to proceed with Rafah offensive unless they get that plan in there because the humanitarian plans for everywhere else in Rafah was not very robust and sound either. It wouldn't have led to this civilian death toll and the humanitarian crisis that the enclave is facing right now.
I am not going to speak for the Israeli government. I will speak for the United States and make clear what our expectation is. And the expectation is as I have outlined it, and we have communicated that quite clearly with them.
Okay, to push a little bit more on Sean's question, like EU's foreign policy chief Borrell, for example, said U.S. should consider cutting aid to Israel, and we know that there is growing frustration with Netanyahu's government. Is that at all a possibility that the administration is considering if, it would not have any success in the coming days in terms of moving Israel?
So let me say a few things about that. The most important of which is that we have pursued the policy that we think gives us the maximum ability to be successful in influencing how Israel conducts its military campaign. And how
are you happy with the results of that?
in many cases, no, absolutely we are not. We are happy with the fact that we have been able to get humanitarian assistance into Israel. That is the direct result of into Gaza. That is the direct result of U.S. intervention. But at the same time, there has not been enough humanitarian assistance that has gotten in. We are happy with some of the deconfliction measures that Israel has put in place at our specific urging, at the request of the Secretary and others in the administration. Those deconfliction measures have not been as successful as we would like them to be. We are happy that over the past month, we have seen civilian casualties come down from the incredibly high rates that they were. They are still alarmingly high. They are still way too high. So in all of this, it's a process where we engage with the Israeli government, look to use every bit of expertise that we have to communicate to them the steps that we ought to take. And we use all of the levers at our disposal to influence them to the best of our ability, and that'll continue to be an ongoing process.
So you're still ruling out cutting of any aid?
I am not ruling anything out. I'm saying we have not made the assessment that is a decision, or that is a step that would be more impactful than the steps that we have already taken. And at the same time, you have to look at the fact that such a step, how such a step would be received by Israel's opponents, both inside Gaza and outside of the state of Israel.
So, Matt, can you just say, what levers have you used?
So we have used diplomatic levers. The Secretary has...
That means the Secretary and the President and you and Kirby and whoever else standing up and saying, wagging your finger and saying that that's not really leverage.
We have engaged with them on at a multitude of levels at this administration. And as you look at the list that we just went through with Humera, we have seen them take steps at our urging that have had real tangible impact, but they have not been enough.
But what levers have you actually used?
I think that when the United States of America stands up and says something publicly, it matters.
But you haven't.
That's a lever,
but you haven't said that there would be any consequences.
To my point, we have seen
in terms of money or military assistance, right?
But we have seen, because of the policies we have pursued, we have seen improvements along these specific areas. We have seen tangible improvements. Again,
okay, but
not
I'm
the
just
level
asking you what leverage have you used? What leverage have you brought to bear?
I just went through it.
What have you gone?
I think the words of the President of the United States, the words of the Secretary of State matter, and we have seen. Hold on, we have
over
seen,
the top,
and we have seen
leverage,
and we have seen the government of Israel respond to it. Not always in the way that we want, not always to the degree that we want, or to the level that we want, but our interventions, we believe, have had an impact, and we will continue to pursue them because we believe they do.
I'm not trying to take a position on what you have done so far is adequate or inadequate, but you seem to be taking the position that what you have done so far is inadequate, because while you say you have seen some results from the quote-unquote pressure that you have applied, they're not enough, and that the situation is still not good and not and not acceptable to you. Is that a fair assessment of what you said?
I will say, I think that sometimes people pretend that the United States of America has a magic wand that it can wave to make any situation in the world roll out in exactly the way that we would want it to, and that is never the case.
Okay, well, I
we
would
use,
just,
we use
I
the
would just
tools
say
that are
that there
available.
are other people.
We
there
use the
were
tools that
other-
are available to try to influence policy. They are imperfect, and there are ways in which we have been able to show tangible results and more that we want to do, and that is why we continue to stay
Okay, but
engaged.
there are others who would say that you have a multitude of billions of things that you could use to,
I'm aware.
yeah, exactly. So, and you haven't used those. That
As
correct?
always, when we look at all of the tools in our at our disposal, we have to look at the upsides of using them, and we have to look at the downsides in making those determinations.
So,
Yeah, correct,
but
correct.
the answer is no.
It is
You
not a
haven't.
determination we have made at this point.
No, no,
We
no, no, no,
did.
but have you gone to the Israelis and said, look, if you don't, do what we think you should do, or, at least take our position into account, there will be some kind of tangible consequence other than the finger wagging and the president saying this is over the top. Is there any real oomph?
I am not going to get into the private conversations that we have with the government of Israel, but they are quite clear about our positions on these matters.
Can I really follow up
Yeah.
on this point? Can I follow on?
Where were you done? Yeah, go ahead, Said.
Okay, if with the indulgence of my colleagues. Now, to Matt's point, the President of the United States of America went out and told the entire world, Israel's conduct is over the top. Israel's conduct is over the top. So if it's over the top, what are you willing to do to make it go under the top?
We are going to engage with them on specific areas where we expect to see improvement.
What kind of improvement? I mean, we saw yesterday that
We wa-
they bombed,
So-
they killed 120 people, maybe a lot more. We don't know how many injured and so on, or how many among the injured will end up dying and all these things. And you're saying that this is, just what you said. You said that we've seen them bomb Rafah, all throughout. Does that make it okay? Does that make it okay when everybody, including the Secretary of State, including the President of the United States of America, including many leaders in this country, have said, you should not attack Rafah, period. Or you can attack it by air? Is that it?
We have always said that they can attack legitimate military targets, and we want to see them take every step that they can to minimize civilian casualties. As I just said, we have seen civilian casualties come down, but as you and I
Right.
as you and I have discussed many times in this room, Saeed, they face a very difficult situation in that Hamas continues to hide itself
Right.
among the civilian population. If this was a war being fought on a battlefield where Hamas would come out and fight, it would be a much different scenario.
Right.
Unfortunately, it is not. So Israel faces a very difficult situation. Doesn't lessen their need to do more, and that's why we continue to engage with them on this question.
But the fact is that you do have a magic wand. You have a huge, big magic wand. And that magic wand...
I'm glad you think it's a magic wand,
It is a
Saeed.
magic wand.
I
It is a
don't think
magic
people share
wand,
that assessment.
but it's real. It's substantive.
But it is a wand.
It's a wand. I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars that are approved to make this war keep on going. While in fact, we have seen reports from the United Nations that telling you are a shake away, Matt, from starvation in Gaza. Nothing is going into Rafah. No aid. None of this is going on. I mean, there are so many things that are going on at the same time that the United States can, in fact, use its magic wand.
So, Saeed, we have used a number of levers at our disposal, and that is why humanitarian assistance is going into Rafah. In fact, your contention is not true. There were nearly 200 trucks that are going into Gaza. There are nearly 200 trucks of humanitarian assistance that went into Gaza yesterday. If we want to go back to the beginning, it is because of the intervention of the United States that humanitarian assistance is going in. We continue to call for more. When the Secretary was there last week, he raised directly with the Prime Minister that we want to see Erez Crossing open so that we can continue to do more. And it is that repeated, sustained engagement that we have shown over time has delivered results, and it's why we'll continue to stay engaged.
Do you expect that Director Burns is meeting tomorrow or scheduled meeting tomorrow in Cairo will produce anything? What is the feeling in this building on the ongoing discussions?
So first of all, I'm going to look around and remind everyone that I'm the spokesperson for the State
Yes,
Department,
absolutely.
not
I
any other
understand,
agency. So I'm not
but
going to speak to the travel of.
Well, you're the highest
members
government spokesman in
Members
this
of
room.
members of other agencies in the government. I will say generally as it relates to engagement over the release of hostages. You heard the secretary speak to this and say that we think progress can be made. There were a number of really untenable items in the proposal that came back from Hamas, but we do believe that a deal is possible, and we're going to continue to pursue it from this building as well as from others, because we think the benefits of a pause and a deal for hostages are tremendous. Not just obviously for the hostages who would be released, but also for the humanitarian effort in Gaza and for our ability to begin to pursue a real and lasting, sustainable resolution of this conflict. Yeah.
I mean, is there any contradiction in that? I mean, the Israelis taking military action to free hostages. Do you think that affects at all the deal that's on the table or the deal that's being negotiated?
I don't think it shouldn't. I think the Israelis are well within their rights to do everything in their power to try to get back the hostages that were taken from Israel and continue to be held, have been held for far too long now, and it should in no way impact the negotiations. Olivia, go ahead. Oh, sorry, Jen. Olivia, go ahead. Come to Jen.
Just one point of clarification, because our understanding is that there's not yet a clear commitment from the Israeli government to have representation at these talks in Cairo. Understanding you're not their spokesperson, are you relaying to the Israelis the importance of participating in these talks in order to achieve any outcome?
I'm not going to obviously not speak for them, but I'm also not going to speak to our private negotiations. But obviously, we do believe that these discussions are important. We believe that it's important that we continue to engage around the need to secure these hostages and obtain a humanitarian pause, and we will continue to pursue that with the government of Israel as well as with the governments of Egypt and Qatar.
And do you believe these activities in Rafah, your view is not that it is not the unspooling of a campaign, but do you believe they're counterproductive to hostage talks?
I just can't speak to what the intent of these particular strikes last night were. But look, Israel has had an ongoing military campaign, so I don't know why a new set of strikes would change the nature of these negotiations. They have been conducting a military campaign since shortly after the immediate hours after October 7th, so there's nothing really there that should have an impact
But
on
this
these
happens
talks.
to target a city center where 1.2 million Palestinian civilians are concentrated.
Correct, but I'm not sure why that would have an impact on the hostage talks. If Hamas was going to pull out of these talks, maybe Hamas should stop hiding. But it's Hamas that continues to hide behind those civilians.
Well, with respect, I mean, it's to the secretary's line that, not forgetting a common humanity here is what I thought was top of mind for the administration.
Of course, it is top of mind for the administration. Israel does still have the need, or the ability, and the need, and the right to carry out legitimate military campaigns that target members of Hamas, Hamas leadership, Hamas battalions. We support their right to do so, but we want to see them conducted in full compliance with international humanitarian law, and we want to see them minimize civilian casualties. And when we see reports of civilian casualties, we raise those directly with the government of Israel and seek more information about them.
And the U.S. does concur that there's a legitimate military reason in order to conduct these strikes in Rafah. I understand you can't.
There are
get into the details.
Hamas battalions in Rafah. That is an undisputed fact.
Well, I just have two other separate questions. One is on whether you can tell us anything about the Americans who have been detained by the IDF in both the West Bank and Gaza. Do you have clarity on the circumstances of their detention? Have you been requesting and gotten offered consular access?
We don't have clarity on the situation. I can say that with respect to both of these situations, I think, as you know, because of privacy considerations, lots of times in these cases we're not able to speak to the details. But in both cases, we are aware of the matter and are engaged with the families and seeking more information from the government of Israel.
Is there a preliminary level of concern involved in any of these?
Until we have been able to acquire more information, I don't think I should offer.
Okay, last one, sorry. I'm sure you've seen the reports of Hamas having a command center underneath UNRWA's headquarters. Does that alter the U.S.'s thinking in terms of the potential resumption of funding down the line is it being linked at all to the issue of the 12 employees who are alleged to have involvement in October 7th?
So we believe that's a matter that needs to be investigated, and we have sought further information from both the government of Israel and from UNRWA itself. We'll continue to engage with them to seek out more information. With respect to the investigation that the UN is conducting, clearly this is the type of thing that they ought to look at. Their investigation ought to look at both the circumstances of the 12 individuals who were reported to have participated in the October 7th attacks, as well as any other Hamas infiltration or involvement with UNRWA.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm good, Jen. Yeah.
Have you gotten any information from the IDF on these 3 American citizens? Have they acknowledged that they are detaining them?
Again, as I said, I have to speak with some generality here because of the privacy considerations. As you know, we're just restricted by law from what we can say. Due to privacy law, I'm just not able to say any more other than that we're seeking more information from the government of Israel.
Sorry, the UNRWA headquarters, are you saying that you accept, that you believe, you have no reason to doubt the Israeli claims that there were?
No, I said we're seeking more information from both the government of Israel and UNRWA about the matter.
So you're not entirely sure yet?
But the point of seeking information is to get that information and
Well,
make an assessment.
Fair enough, but
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I understood your
Yeah.
response. Thank you.
And then on
Yeah,
the
go ahead.
Rafah situation, the Egyptians have reportedly threatened to pull out of the Camp David Accords if Israel is to move forward with this full-scale operation in Rafah. Is this something that's been conveyed to the U.S.? How concerned are you about the collapse of this?
Look, I just think that gets several steps beyond where we are today. I think where we are today is that we have said we want to see a credible humanitarian plan developed, one that can be executed before any operation proceeds. The Prime Minister has asked the Israeli military to develop such a plan. We are a long way ahead of being able to talk to what potential ramifications are, and I don't think it's appropriate for me to speculate on those today.
And then I have one on non-Middle East, Jeff, if you
Okay,
want to come
I'll
back.
come back to you. Go ahead.
There is some reporting that the plan that Israelis are working on for Rafah is to build a tent city by Egypt and funded by the United States and some of your GCC allies. Are you aware of this reporting? And is this something that you can support?
I'm not aware of that reporting. I would say that again, we're it's not quite, maybe not quite far down the road as Jenny's question, but a little further down the road than where we are today. The Prime Minister has just asked for this humanitarian plan to be developed yet. Our understanding is it's not yet been developed. We certainly haven't seen it. So we will look to see what the government of Israel develops and we're prepared to react to that, but I don't think I'm ready to react to any
But what plan, in your assessment, what this plan will look like?
I don't know what the plan is going to look like because
No,
we are not the ones developing.
something will be
I will
acceptable
say
for you.
what we would expect for any plan is that it have a credible means for dealing with the hundreds of thousands, probably over 1 million people who are currently in Rafah. Something that puts civilian protections first and decides or ensures that civilians are protected, that they have a chance to get out of harm's way, that they have access to food and water and medicine. All of those are the elements of any type of plan that we would find credible. But importantly, it has to be a plan. I keep using this word because I want to make sure everyone hears me. Not just a credible plan, but one that can actually be executed.
So just to make a fine point on this. So are you saying that you are not opposed or would not be opposed to paying for whatever Israel's plan is to whenever it comes out?
I was.
I mean, do they have to pay for anything?
I was
they're
commenting.
the ones who are doing this. Do they?
So
or
we are getting.
you and the GCC are going to pick up the tab for all of it?
I am not aware of any proposal for the United States.
No, I know,
to
but are you opposed to paying for?
Matt, I don't even know what the report he's referring to is. I have
Well,
heard. Hold on,
forget
hold on,
about the
hold on.
report
I
he's
know, but
referring to.
you can.
Is the United States prepared to pay for the plan that Israel may or may not come up with
so
for the
that has
evacuation of civilians?
that has
from
not
Rafah?
been the role of the United States in this conflict. I do not foresee it being the role of the United States in
Okay.
conflict. That said, the reason why it's hard to answer any kind of thing definitively, we provide money to humanitarian partners in the
Yes.
region, and they do things like provide food and water
Yeah.
to people who are in Gaza, so that you could see how that kind of funding could be used in that regard. But
All right.
not specifically to the way you propose it. Yeah, go ahead.
Two quick ones before we close the loop on the hostages. What is your understanding, or like, do you have a timeline on when you're expecting a response from Israel on the Hamas counter proposal?
I don't want to put any kind of timeline on it. No.
Right, but you are expecting them to come back with a response to the Hamas counter proposal, so that this would,
We want
so that
to-
you can pursue this.
We
effort.
want to see these discussions proceed. We believe that progress can be made, and I will leave it at that.
Okay, one more. If the Israeli side somehow doesn't show up tomorrow, will that meeting go ahead? Will those conversations still go ahead?
You know I don't answer if questions, Humaira.
You know I try.
I do.
We all
I
try.
do. Michelle, go ahead.
Do you have any updates on U.S. efforts to push forward the two-state solution and the normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel?
I don't have any updates beyond what the secretary said, but if you tuned into his remarks in the region last week, he made very clear that this was the subject of conversation between him and his Arab counterparts when we traveled to Saudi Arabia and to Qatar and to Egypt, and it was also the subject of our conversations with the government of Israel. He has been engaging with partners in the region to talk about plans for Gaza, for the reconstruction and the rebuilding and governance of Gaza after this conflict. And one of the things that we have heard from partners in the region, including most notably from Saudi Arabia, is that a path to two states has to be a part of that. And I say most notably because the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has made clear that in order to pursue normalization, they expect to see a time-bound, irrevocable path to two states. And so we had those conversations last week, and we had them with the government of Israel, and we will continue to have them in the weeks ahead.
Thank you.
Sir, one quick one.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to ask you about the decision of Qatar to release 8 combat personnel to India. Have you seen that reports, and what's your thoughts on that?
I'll have to take that back and get you an answer. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Two questions, one on Gaza and one on Turkey, if I may. On the killing of 6-year-old Hind Rayab after an Israeli tank targeted their family car in Gaza, the Geneva-based nonprofit Euromed Human Rights Monitor determined that the IDF is responsible for the bombing of the ambulance that attempted to rescue Hindi. And it also reported that American-made weapons was found at the bombed ambulance. Have you seen that report, and do you have any response?
Yeah, we are devastated about the reports of the death of Hind Rajab. I will tell you that I have a little girl that's about to turn 6 myself, and so it is just a devastating account, a heartbreaking account for this child, and of course there have been thousands of other children who have died as a result of this conflict. And every one of them is a tragedy that I know, I can tell you, everyone in the United States government feels quite deeply. We have asked the Israeli authorities to investigate this incident on an urgent basis. We understand that they are doing so. We expect to see those results on a timely fashion, and they should include accountability measures as appropriate.
And do you have anything to say on that? You know, American-made weapons were found at the site.
I just don't, I'm not able to verify.
Is the U.S. assessing whether or not Israel is using that weapons in accordance with the laws of war?
We always expect that they use all weapons, whether they be provided by the United States.
But are you making an assessment on that?
Let me just say, I think this is an important distinction because we get asked this question. Whether weapons are provided by the United States or that they have acquired through some other method or whether they manufacture them themselves, it is our expectation that they use them in full compliance with the laws of war, and we engage with them on that matter. But I don't think I can offer you an assessment on this particular one because, as I've said, we've asked them to investigate, and they have said that they would do so. We want to see them do it as quickly as possible, and I don't think I should speak to it before that investigation.
Just a quick one on Turkey. The F-16 sale has been approved over the weekend as there was no objections from Congress. Do you have any comments on that?
I don't. I'll have to check that and get back with you. Obviously, we have made quite clear our position that this sale should move forward. But
Heard back from the Israelis yet about the demolition of the university in Gaza?
Let me check and get back and get you an answer.
Or any of the other investigations?
We have heard back from them on a number of different things that we raised with them.
Well, have you
with
gotten anything
respect to this.
definitive or?
With respect to the specific one, let me find out and get you an answer. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. So what is your overall analysis on Pakistani elections? Despite all efforts of rigging, Imran Khan came out as the winner. What is your overall analysis on the elections?
I guess you didn't read my statement that we put out on Friday,
Yeah,
where I spoke to our analysis,
yeah,
analysis of this.
But now the results are...
Sure.
yeah.
Let me say that we congratulate the Pakistani people, first of all, for participating on the election on Thursday. That includes poll workers, civil society members, journalists, and election observers who have protected Pakistan's democratic and electoral institutions. We did express concerns publicly. We also expressed those concerns privately and joined the EU, the UK, and other countries in doing so with some irregularities that we saw in the process. We've conveyed the need for the Pakistani government to respect the will of the election. You know, we emphasize, you heard us you heard me from this podium certainly repeatedly, but also across the government, emphasize that we wanted to see the rule of law, respect for Constitution, free press, vibrant civil society, respected in the run-up to the election. We continue to believe that's the case. We condemn political and election-related violence and restrictions on internet and cell phone service. Those negatively impacted the electoral service. The claims of interference and fraud that we have seen raised, we want to ensure are fully investigated by Pakistan's legal system, and we will be continuing to monitor that in the days ahead.
So you said that you are ready to work with the new Pakistani government. But if this new Pakistani government came in with the allegations of fraud and irregularities, what is your opinion?
Well, I don't think there is a new Pakistani government yet. I believe there's still discussions going on about the formation of a government. But one of the things that we have said leading up to the election, and we'll continue to make clear, is that whoever the Pakistani people choose to represent them, we will work with that government. And as to the claims of fraud, we want to see those fully investigated. Yeah, go ahead.
I know you said there isn't a Pakistani government yet, but certainly former Prime Minister Khan's faction, some of them are independents, came in ahead. Is there any concern about the legitimacy of whoever actually becomes the leader of Pakistan?
I will say that let me just reiterate that we do think that the claims of fraud need to be fully investigated. That said, it was clearly a competitive election in which people were able to exercise their choice. Now, that said, there were irregularities. We want to see them investigated. But ultimately, we respect the democratic process, and we're ready to work with the government once it's formed.
And just one more on Pakistan. The authorities have had a ban on assembly. Some of Imran Khan's supporters have called for protests on this. Is there any concern about freedom of assembly right now in Pakistan?
Certainly, we want to see the freedom of assembly is respected anywhere in the world. Alex, go ahead.
A couple of questions. Europe. EU Council today approved a regulation allowing profits from frozen Russian assets to be used in Ukraine. Do you endorse that decision or support it, don't like it? What is your opinion about that?
So we are encouraged by any action the EU may take to use Russian assets for the benefit of Ukrainians. We continue to be in active conversations with our allies and partners, including the G7, on what additional steps may be possible within respective legal systems and under international law to make Russia cease its aggression against Ukraine and to ensure Russia pays for the damage it has caused.
Is the United States considering to follow suit?
So we are supportive of having domestic legislative authorities. We've made that clear in the past that it will give us flexibility as we continue these discussions with our allies and our partners. Ultimately, we want to see Russia pay for the damage it's caused, and we continue to pursue all appropriate vehicles to do so.
Speaking of allies and partners in Europe, any reaction to shockwaves we have seen over the weekend among allies in reaction to suggestions coming out of this town? I understand there's a presidential election going on, but in general, pushback against suggestions that the United States might not support its allies in case of Russian attack.
So you heard the president speak to this over the weekend and made clear that any suggestion that encouraging Russia to invade our allies and partners are dangerous, and I would obviously echo that from here. And I would just say, as we often say, that the NATO alliance provides actual security to the American people. This isn't just a benefit. This isn't just an alliance that the United States puts into. We also get a lot out of this alliance. And the only time that NATO has ever come to the defense of one of its member countries, it was coming to the defense of the United States after 9/11. And so we have been heartened by the broad support for NATO from the American people. We have been heartened by the broad support for NATO from Congress, and I think I'll leave it at that.
How much has the former president's statement damaged your relationship?
I don't think I should comment on remarks made in the.
May I move to Central Asia, if possible? Kyrgyzstan today responded harshly to the secretary's criticism over Russia-backed NGO law they're trying to pass through the parliament, and they are, referring to the U.S. FARA law. Any reaction, any response?
Let me take that back and
Final,
get you a comment.
and finally, if I may, on South Caucasus, Azerbaijan, Armenia, looks like they are trying to move along through negotiation process without any mediator. Where do you stand on this?
I don't want to comment on that specifically, but I'll say that we do obviously support continued dialogue around that issue. We believe it's the best way to reach a sustainable end to the conflict, and we will continue to pursue it.
And Azerbaijan has.
You said several times that you want Russia to pay for the damage that it's caused. Is that because you see them as the aggressor here, or they are the aggressor?
They very much are the aggressor. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so what about in other cases, like after World War II? The Japanese attacked us, but then the Germans declared war on us. So we went in, and the Marshall Plan paid for huge amounts of reconstruction in Europe, and the United States also paid for the reconstruction of Japan after the war. So does that same, and recognizing that the situations are not exactly similar, but does Israel bear any responsibility for paying for the reconstruction of Gaza?
So
Or do they get to foist it off on others?
So the situations are not at all.
No, but they're all conflicts, and I realize that World War II is over, and the Ukraine war is not over,
Yeah.
but neither is the Gaza war. And you're saying that Russia right now has to pay for the damage that it caused in Ukraine. So I'm just wondering, would you say the same, that Israel should pay for at least some of the damage that it has caused in Gaza, even though it's fighting, for what you say is a completely justifiable, or what is a completely justifiable?
So what I would say on that matter is that one of the things that we have heard through the Secretary's diplomacy in the region is that there are countries who are ready to step up and help pay for the reconstruction of Gaza. I don't mean Israel, other countries who are willing to step up and help with the reconstruction of Gaza and put real money into the game, as well as real, political credibility. But that's another matter on another track. But just with respect to reconstruction, there are other countries who are willing to contribute to the.
No, recontribute is right, because they've already rebuilt Gaza like three times, right?
Fair point.
And so,
let me just finish.
but Israel is not one of those countries.
Let me just finish.
Okay.
Our discussions have been about other countries who are willing to contribute to the rebuilding of Gaza, but they expect something from Israel in return, and that's that we've talked about this path to two states.
But what about
So
money?
I'm not
What
going
about
to get into the
reconstruction?
hypothetical, because we think the policy that we ought to pursue is this path that the Secretary has laid out that would lead to the rebuilding of Gaza, and would avoid the question that you are putting on the table.
No,
I'm saying
I wouldn't avoid the question. Someone's got to pay for it.
No, I'm saying it avoids the question of Israel having to pay for it. The path that we think forward is the one that we put on the table.
So you think that path would
Well,
relieve Israel of any
it would certainly.
obligation from
I do not want to say we are fully well down the path that we have not hardly even started walking at this point.
Fine, but
certainly,
the same thing. You could say the same thing about Ukraine. That war is not over yet
either. It would bring other countries to the table.
Yeah, but okay. But how about Israel? Do they?
Again, I said we are not at that point yet in these conversations. So.
All right.
Mine is on this flurry of mixed reports that an American being held hostage by the Taliban, Ryan Corbett, may be released in the coming days. Have you looked into those reports? Is there any merit to them? And can
None that I'm aware of.
there's no
No, there are no
factual
plans
basis for
that
them?
we're aware of for him to be released. It is obviously a matter that we continue to engage on. We continue to seek his release. I've seen some reports incorrectly linking his release or potential release to the release of 2 former Guantanamo detainees in Oman. Those reports are completely meritless. There's no linkage at all between the two. My understanding is that the release of those 2 former detainees in Oman was a result of the expiration of security conditions or security restrictions that were a condition of their transfer, and there is in no way linked to Ryan Corbett's case. That said, we continue to engage on this. It continues to be a top priority for us to see the release of Ryan Corbett, and we'll continue to work on it. But the reports that I've seen are just not based on anything. Yeah.
Leaving aside whether they're connected, I mean, the release of the 2 former Guantanamo prisoners, or the transfer, from Oman to Afghanistan, is that the cause of any concern, or is that sort of not the U.S.'s problem anymore? Does the U.S. have any take on that?
I will have to take it and get back with you. I'm not aware of the conditions under which they were transferred in the first place, which would impact on how it would bear on the answer to that question.
Sure.
So go ahead, Jamie.
Another detained American, Putin seemed to indicate that he would be open to a prisoner swap for Evan Gershkovich. Does the U.S. see any significance in him publicly making these comments? And what's the latest on talks for him and Paul Whelan?
So we have always made clear that not only do we want to see the release of Paul Whelan and Evan Gershkovich, but that we have put a significant offer on the table. In fact, more than once, we have put offers on the table to secure their release. And we will continue to engage to try to pursue or try to obtain their release. And I just don't want to comment on President Putin's
Is the
comments.
most recent significant proposal the one that you raised from the podium a couple of months
I don't
ago?
want to comment on any further developments in that case. From time to time, we make the decision to make things public, but ultimately we decide to do most of that.
And did that
quietly
proposal
behind the scenes.
include Krasikov, who Putin seems to
I
want?
think I'm never going to comment on what those
think
private
we're gonna have to
proposals
do
might
that,
include. Go ahead, Willie.
I just wanted to circle back to the 2 Americans taken by the IDF in Gaza. Family members say the only communication they've had with the U.S. government is a confirmation of receipt. Is that normal 4 or 5 days into this to not have had kind of more communication with State Department or anyone?
I really wish there was more that I could say. There are privacy rules that can only be waived by the individuals themselves, not by family members. This is not true. I'm not speaking with respect to this case. I'm speaking with respect to cases in general that prohibit us from talking about the cases. So unfortunately, I can't say any more other than that we're aware of the matter and we are engaged with the government of Israel to try and learn more information. And Ryan, go ahead, and then we'll wrap for today.
Yeah, wanted to pick up real quickly on your Pakistan comment. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think you said that the State Department hopes that the Pakistani courts will take a close look at this matter. You've also heard from a lot of members of Congress who have said there should be an independent investigation of the fraud before the U.S. recognizes any new government. I'm not sure if you saw this. The High Court in Pakistan just tossed out, most of the challenges, despite the fact that the media there has seen 100% of the returns, and the challenges are entirely legitimate. It's like not even a he said, she said. So the court process seems to already have played out. Does the State Department want to see an independent investigation, as members of Congress are calling for?
So I don't know what venue's not the right word, but what body they're proposing to conduct an independent investigation would be. I'm happy to look at that if there's a specific proposal. Right now, we think as a matter of first course, it's that the legal system play itself out in Pakistan. That's the appropriate first step to take, and we think that's the step that should be taken. If there are additional steps that ought to be entertained, we're happy to look at them at that time.
And the same question on Hind Rajab, though, to follow up on, I think, what the point Matt was trying to make. You've said you've urged Israel to investigate her killing, respond very quickly, and take accountability if they find something's wrong. I think Matt's point, though, is that you've urged a lot of accountability, a lot of investigations, and we don't have evidence of them coming back with accountability. Should there be a second level investigation into her killing?
Again, it's hard
If
to.
you're not satisfied with what they come
Again,
back
it's
with.
hard to comment on a second level before we've concluded the first level. We want to see the government of Israel investigate this matter. If they find that somebody behaved inappropriately or violation of law, we want to see accountability. And I wouldn't want to speculate on what further measures might be appropriate before that first step has been completed. With that,
Follow-up?
wrap for today. Thanks, everyone.